Right. Well, Megan, I'm thinking kick it off. Just we've got a lot to cover tonight, so welcome everyone. And if you're here this evening to hear about the proposed rulemaking for commercial Dungeness crab, um, you're in the right place. To start, I'll cover introductions. So I am Lorna Wargo with our agency's intergovernmental ocean policy team. And with me tonight is Megan Hintz, who serves as our coastal marine fisheries whale entanglement coordinator. And as you can tell, for those of you that might know me, I am suffering from laryngitis. So just want to thank you all for attending tonight, for your participation, and just I'm going to turn it over here shortly to Megan. We also have Leah Snyder and Sue Lee from the agency with us providing technical support. So yeah, welcome all of you and appreciate that you're attending this evening's meeting. And yeah, I think Megan, I'll turn it over to you and we can get started. So thank you, everyone.
Great, thanks, Lorna. Well, welcome everyone. Here's our agenda for our meeting. If there aren't a lot of questions, we might wrap up a bit early, but we just went through introductions. We'll sort of give a preview of the proposed rule and an overview of the fishery that the rule impacts, give a brief summary of large whale entanglements, sort of the rationale and incentive for developing some of these rules. And we'll go into detail for all of the proposed rule changes and how it'll impact folks. And then we'll give an overview of the economic impact and some of the analysis we've done there, and provide time for questions before we adjourn. Each of these sort of topics is a bit different, so we'll pause after each sort of section and give folks an opportunity to answer any questions or see any comments they have on those specific parts. And if there are things we'll be addressing later, we'll sort of just note that and then get to it when we get to it. So as an introduction, here is our proposed rule, purpose, and need. There are the coast and Puget Sound are two distinct fisheries that are managed under different statutes, licensing programs, and regulations. The rule changes being proposed include administrative changes to Puget Sound, but the substantive changes are focused on the coastal commercial Dungeness crab fishery, which is where both Lorna and I work. The geographic scope of the coastal fishery is defined through RCW to include the Pacific Ocean, Grace Harbor, Willapa Bay, and the Columbia River. For the coast and Puget Sound, we are implementing gear marking prohibitions. These have already been implemented in Puget Sound through emergency rule when they opened the fishery. And then this is sort of moving that into permanent rule for both the coast and Puget Sound. We are shifting the compliance responsibility to the operator. And then we are clarifying sort of when your annual buoy registration has to be done. And that has to be done before fishing. For the coastal Dungeness crab fishery, which is where the substantive changes are, we are proposing new comprehensive fishing line marking requirements, which is an expansion from the existing line marking requirement that we have in the fishery. We are proposing limitations to surface gear allowance for sort of each pot, and then clarification on sort of buoy brand registration as well, to prohibit the use of buoy brands required in the tribal fishery. And these are all sort of needed for entanglement risk reduction and sort of monitoring of entanglements. So improving our gear traceability, positive and negative attribution, and monitoring requirements that we have to be able to get an incidental take permit and for the upcoming take reduction team. This slide here is sort of a timeline of events. It's not completely comprehensive, but it hits on the sort of the key events that have happened. So in 2015, we first saw sort of this increase in whale entanglements West Coast wide. And then in 2017, Washington created a whale entanglement working group and held some West Coast. There were also some West Coast entanglement workshops that were held coastwide that we attended. As part of that entanglement working group, we developed a best fishing practices guide for entanglement risk reduction. In 2018, we submitted notice of intent to apply for an incidental take permit. Incidental take permit is something we need to get under sort of the ESA, Endangered Species Act, to have the sort of coverage to incidentally interact with endangered species. In 2019, by emergency rule mid-season, we implemented a pot reduction in the summer season in July for the remainder of the season, reducing each individual fisher's pot limits by 1/3, 30% reduction. And then in 2020, that summer pot reduction was adopted in a suite of entanglement risk reduction rules as permanent rules. This is when the first line marking requirement was implemented. This is when we also implemented a taut line requirement, or sort of limiting the amount of line to that that is necessary. And we removed regulatory barriers for testing on-demand gear. In 2021 and 2022, there were 2 pilot projects for electronic monitoring in the coastal fishery, phase 1 and phase 2. Electronic monitoring is key as sort of part of how we better monitor where fishing is occurring, and thinking about that in sort of our information gathering for entanglement risk reduction. And then in 2023, that electronic monitoring was adopted as a permanent rule. It required all coastal Dungeness crab fishery license holders or vessels have to have electronic monitoring now. We clarified some of the line marking requirements and implemented sort of this prohibition that I spoke to earlier on sort of any line marking theme that is required on sort of any West Coast fishery for other fixed gear fisheries in Washington State. Last year, we sort of have started to develop our comprehensive line marking rule proposal, which is sort of coordinated amongst other states. So that has been in the works for a while, but this is when we sort of really developed our rule language, working with industry. And then in 2025 here now, we are bringing this rule proposal to the Fish and Wildlife Commission. So then here's like a overview of the coastal fishery. Unique to the crab fishery management, the state of Washington, Oregon, and California have the authority to manage the fishery in federal water from 3 miles to 200 miles out through the provisions of Magnuson-Stevens Act, so all through the EEZ. The 3 states coordinate management through the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission to operate an orderly fishery through our approach to biotoxin management, crab quality, and on management measures implemented to reduce entanglement risk comprehensively along the West Coast. Behind the recent actions related to whale entanglements that presented in the timeline are a robust set of conservation measures that guide management in the coastal fishery. There's no formal assessment of the coastal Dungeness crab resources. Instead, a common fishery management strategy, referred to as the 3S strategy, is used to protect the health and reproductive vitality of the crab resource. The 3S strategy applies to both commercial and recreational fisheries and refers to regulations that specify the legal size of harvestable crab, allows only the retention of male crab, and closes the commercial fishery during primary molt period for male Dungeness crab. You can think of these measures similarly to how you think about salmon escapement, in that these measures in place only a fraction of the crab resources to harvest every year, leaving a substantial portion of the population, all female and all male crabs less than 6 inches, to sustain the resource into the future. The 3S strategy has been in place in Washington for approximately 70 years and is used for crustacean fisheries around the world. In addition to these resource conservation measures, the department has implemented additional measures to provide effective management and further support the long-term stability of the resource. In the 1990s, a license limitation program was implemented, capping the number of coastal commercial licenses at 223. Pot limits assigned to each of these licenses were then implemented along with buoy tags to enforce these pot limits. In the 2000s, a regulation was implemented that requires Washington coastal Dungeness crab license to fish in both state and federal waters adjacent to the Washington coast. Prior to that, a vessel license in Oregon or California could be fished outside 3 miles off the Washington coast. California and Oregon implemented complementary regulations, so all state commercial licenses required to fish in state and state adjacent federal waters on the West Coast. We refer to this as LE 200. It didn't further limit the number of Washington licenses. It still is capped at the 223, but it prevents any vessel without a Washington license from fishing off the Washington coast in federal waters. In 2009, WDFW implemented the first derelict gear recovery program on the West Coast and expanded its scope in 2020. The remaining items here repeat the major actions presented in the timeline, and this summarizes the management framework and resource protection measures. Through these programs and strategies, management of coastal Dungeness crab has been very successful and is sustained over 70 years and is economically the most viable coastal fishery. In some years, it's the most valuable commercial fishery in all of Washington. Oops, sorry. The pie chart shows coastal fisheries with Dungeness crab in purple, comprising nearly 3/4 of the ex-vessel revenue. The remaining quarter includes 9 other fisheries or groups of fisheries. The top 5 among these are albacore tuna, pink shrimp, whiting or pollock, and other finfish, which includes salmon. The bar on the right shows the state or non-treated coastal Dungeness crab landings history and the value of the 1990-91 season up to the 2022-2023 season. The bars represent catch, which has ranged from approximately 8 to 24 million pounds since 1990. The Washington coastal Dungeness crab resource has long been observed to experience cyclic fluctuations in abundance as reflected in these landings. These fluctuations are largely driven by environmental conditions. Historical landings going back to the 1950s shows these fluctuations occurring in 10-year intervals, but we are seeing peaks in coastal fishery landings increasing in frequency to about 6-year intervals in recent decades. The black line on this chart indicates ex-vessel value or the amount paid directly to crabbers in millions of dollars. And here we see a steady increase in value. Commercial fishing is important to our coastal communities that depend on fisheries for jobs and revenue. Federal socioeconomic indicators score both Westport and Oahu as highly reliant on Dungeness crab. Okay, so before I jump into large whale entanglements, do any of the participants have any questions on the fishery as a whole?
Yeah, Megan,
Yeah.
here I wanted to pause. I think it would be helpful to explain how they can raise their hand and get permission to speak. I think there's a question about that. And then also, I don't know how easy it is in this format for each panel or each attendee to just introduce themselves and say who they are. So maybe I'll look to Leah or Sue to tell us. But I think it would be helpful for all the participants or attendees to know who is on the webinar tonight. So,
Thanks, Lorna. Yeah, I can't see any chat or hands from my view, so appreciate any help sort of guiding that from.
Okay, so hi, I'm
Meg.
Leah, and so we had a hand up from Larry, but if you want, we can go through and I can call on folks one by one to maybe introduce themselves first.
Yeah, Leah, that sounds great.
Okay, so first on our list, it looks like we have Bridget. Bridget, I have unmuted you. You can introduce yourself now.
Hi, I'm Bridget Meir. I am WDFW's Coastal Region Communications Specialist. So I do a lot of our external communications for the region. So news releases, blog posts, social media, media relations, that sort of thing. Thank you all for attending.
Awesome. Thank you, Bridget. Our next person in the attendees list is Eric. Eric, I have prompted you to unmute. You can introduce yourself now.
Hello.
Hi, Eric, we got you.
Yeah, I'm just listening in. I'm a crab fisherman and a pot manufacturer.
Awesome, thanks, Eric.
Awesome, thank you. Thanks for joining us. Our next attendee is Jamie. Jamie, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jamie Fuller. I work for the department. I'm our coastal shellfish data coordinator, mainly working with our coastal crab data.
Perfect, thank you, Jamie. Our next attendee is Jennifer. Jennifer, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Custer, and my husband and I have a crab boat on the Washington coast.
Perfect, thank you for joining us tonight. Our next person is Kate. Kate, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kate, and I work with marine mammals and most recently work with Save the North Pacific Right Whale. So we're really interested in how we can further whale entanglement protections alongside the livelihoods of folks in the area.
Perfect, thank you, Kate. And next is Larry. Larry, go ahead.
My name is Larry Thievick. I've been a crab fisherman for over 45 years, involved in crab policy for over 50 years. I'm a little concerned about tonight's format on participation. Every meeting we've had so far, we have been able to enter the chat on our own volition. We've been able to raise our hand and see it on a search or see it on a toolbar above your information. And we've been able to mute and unmute at our own discretion. So first off, I had no idea if raising my hand was actually showing up on your end. So I'm a little concerned about what now seems to be kind of a filter process for us to be able to speak up when we feel there might be a time that might be appropriate. So I would, I'd appreciate that we definitely monitor when people on this call do want to make a comment. And I was kind of surprised at this particular protocol, which is different than every other call I've been involved in so far. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you,
Larry. I just wanted to speak to that really quick. And as far as public meetings, we've been holding them this way since 2020. So there is issues. We've had complaints before where attendees aren't able to see each other or see who's in the meeting. But that is why we're going through and introducing folks now. Because when we do it in the webinar format, unfortunately, it's just not an ability we have. That's a Zoom control. But we do have it this way, and we're monitoring the hands very closely, and we will not let any go left go unheard. But also, I think that Zoom has done an update recently where it might have changed where you see the hand raise at. And unfortunately, yeah, that's nothing we can do on our end to control that.
I appreciate your comment, but frankly, I've been on these town hall meetings with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and it's not true that we've had the same format now since I think you said 2020. But anyway, so this is a departure, and right now, if I click on chat, now it's open, but it was not earlier, and there was no intention of introducing participants. So anyway, I appreciate what we're doing now. I had some hesitation. I had some concern. It's being cleared up for the most part, and thanks.
No worries, Larry. Thank you for voicing that concern though and letting us do what we can to help out with those. Okay, our next person in the meeting is Richard. Richard, go ahead.
Hello?
Hi, Richard. We can hear you. I think you've muted. I just prompted you to unmute. I just sent you another prompt to unmute, Richard. Okay, go back to Richard. And next person is Susan. Go ahead.
I don't know if you can hear me or not.
We can hear you now,
Yeah, I
Richard.
can hear you, Richard.
Okay, my name's Richard Miller. I've been fishing crab off the Washington, Oregon, and Alaska coast, Dungeness crab, since late 60s, early 70s. I've seen a lot of good and a lot of bad changes. And kind of, I know this whale entanglement is going to be line marking, and you want us to change our buoy setup. I'm one of the largest boats on the coast, and I've been fishing 90 footers since early 70s on the Washington coast. And we're way up out of the water. We're not like with the smaller vessels, and we fish mostly deep water. And your buoy setup's at 36 feet. That makes it very, very dangerous on a large vessel fishing deep water, because we're 7-8 feet out of the water to our power block, and at 36 feet, we fish 47 foot.
Richard,
Yeah.
yeah, this is Lorna Wargo. Yeah, I want to give you opportunity to provide comment, but I think at this point, we're just looking for each person to announce who they are. And as we get through this slide, there will be an opportunity for you to share your thoughts and concerns. But if you could just hold those for us, we'd really appreciate that.
Okay, then I'll just stand by and speak later.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Susan, if you would like to go ahead now, you can unmute.
Hello, I'm Susan, and my husband and I are crabbers just in Puget Sound, but we thought we'd listen in anyway, just to hear what's going on.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us tonight, Susan. And next on the list is Tracy. Tracy, go ahead.
Hi, my name's Tracy Berry, and I'm just here as a member of the public.
Okay, thank you for joining, Tracy. And the last name on the list tonight is Vito. Vito, you can introduce yourself now.
Hello, I'm Vito Familia. I have a crab vessel in California, Oregon, Washington.
Thank you for joining, Vito. Okay, and I think we'll wait until comments for the next round. But I did want to remind folks on the phone or that are on here just for raising hands. It's a raise hand function at the bottom of your screen. Depending on the Zoom that you are running, it might be a smiley face back at the bottom. It could be just a hand that says raise hand. And if you are on, if you're on a phone, which it doesn't look like we have anybody on a phone tonight, but if you are, you can raise your hand dialing *9 and unmute yourself using *6. Okay, I think we're good to go to the next section.
Great, thanks, Leah. I'm going to then move on to sort of giving an overview of large whale entanglements sort of along the West Coast and what we see in Washington.
I see Larry's hand is up. Is that a new hand or an old hand, Larry?
Yeah, it's a new hand. I just wanted to, after we went through the participant list, just explain why there's so few fishers on this call in part. And that is because we've had really bad weather for the last few days. Today was the first day they could get out. And many of the fishers have thousands and thousands of dollars worth of gear that has been disturbed and shuffled around and moved by the force of God and storms. And they have to be out there retrieving that gear right now. So there was a limited opportunity for them to participate. Please don't take that as a lack of interest. It's because they are trying to protect their fishery and the gear that they have in the water.
Thank you, Larry, for sharing that.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. I just wanted to sort of follow up by letting you know, anyone else, that like this will be recorded. So anyone who was unable to attend who would like to see the presentation, that will be available for folks. And there'll be, there still is, I think public comment is open until March 24th. So there's still plenty of opportunity for us to hear their thoughts, and would love to still hear from them. So this is just one opportunity.
Thank you.
Thanks, Larry. Okay. So whales have a long history of interacting and getting entangled in fishing gear. This isn't something new. It's sort of been happening since fishing gear and whales have been in the water together. But entanglements in fishing gear have been documented as one of the largest contributors to human-caused mortality and serious injury to whales along the West Coast. Along the West Coast, Dungeness crab are harvested with pots that are deployed onto the substrate and attached to a buoy on the surface with line, sometimes more than one buoy. Each pot is rigged with its own line to the surface per sort of legal requirement sort of in the Washington coastal fishery. This sort of differs from sort of how lobster are fished for, say, on the East Coast, where pots are strung together along the bottom of the floor, and then there are fewer lines going to the surface. Whales can become twisted and entangled in the line. They can get embedded in their baleen or their mouth, or wrapped around their body, fins, or their fluke. Some whales are able to shed the gear on their own, but others require intervention from trained disentanglement response teams. And entanglements can be lethal to whales. There are a number of whale species that are at risk, sort of thinking about Washington waters, specifically Washington coastal waters. Both blue and fin whales have been observed and are present off the Washington coast, and have been and are both on the endangered species list and have records of interacting with West Coast Dungeness crab gear. There haven't been any documented interactions with Washington Dungeness crab gear, but given that they are present off the Washington coast and that they have been documented in other coastal Dungeness crab fisheries, the risk is not zero. In Washington, we have documented interactions with both gray whales and humpback whales. The gray whale populations that are in Washington waters are not endangered, but they are protected under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. There are 3 different populations of humpback whales that we see in Washington waters. We have the non-endangered listed Hawaii population, and then the ESA endangered species listed mainland Mexico and Central America populations. Mainland Mexico is listed as threatened, while Central America is listed as endangered. This is sort of showing data of West Coast large whale entanglements from 2013 until through 2024. 2013 is considered the start of the modern era of entanglements. and entanglement reporting, maybe even more importantly. So that's sort of where we start looking at sort of the trends over time. There was a spike in entanglements in 2015 and 2016, which I noted on the timeline. And that is was largely driven by an increase in humpback whale entanglements, and is thought to be caused by the marine heat wave and subsequent sort of changes in whale foraging behavior, and where prey location was for whales, and then a change in fishery as well. The California fishery in particular was delayed due to marine biotoxins, and so there was this higher overlap of when and where whales were and when and where the fishery was occurring. And then, you know, we sort of saw, you know, sort of a decline after 2017, sort of, or after 2016, you know, kind of a peak in 2018, but then still sort of elevated levels throughout this time, comparatively to like 2014 and specifically 2013. And then in 2024, we saw sort of a bit of an increase from the previous 5 years as well along the West Coast. The figure on the right breaks down, oh, sorry, take us back. The figure on the left sort of breaks down each entanglement by fishery that it's been attributed to, or the location of the fishery. Washington Dungeness crab fisheries are indicated by that top bar. In most of the bars is that green figure. And then important to note is that that gray bar at the bottom of each of these years is sort of unidentified gear. The figure on the right breaks down the same data by species, so the same years. And you can see that the majority of the whales that we observe interacting with gear are humpback whales, 66%, followed by gray whales at 24%. So gray whales and humpback whales collectively make over like 90% of the whales that are interacting with gear. And to a much smaller degree, we see sort of orcas, blue whales, fin whales, minke whales, and we saw a sperm whale interact with fishing gear. There are a handful of unidentified whale cases, as you can see, but the number of unidentified whales and entanglements is sort of been decreasing over time. So as entanglement reporting has improved. And then specifically looking at the Washington coastal Dungeness crab gear, the fishery that sort of we're implementing new regulations for to reduce entanglement risk, has a documented record of interactions with both humpback and gray whales, as mentioned previously. On the figure to the left, you can see that gray whales are represented by the green bars and humpback whales are represented by the gray bars. Sorry for that slight confusion maybe. And that we sort of saw a peak in 2018, which was later than sort of the 2015, 2016 peak that sort of West Coast wide saw. And this really triggered Fish and Wildlife to take management actions, specifically the summer pot reduction that was implemented mid-season in 2019. And then in 2019, from 2019 to 2023, we only saw 1 or 2 documented interactions with Washington coastal gear. However, in 2024, we saw an increase in humpback whale entanglements that were documented and reported. The cause of this is still unknown, and so we're looking at sort of coast-wide entanglement records to see sort of like what happened in 2024. Oops, sorry. So next step is sort of why gear marking? Why are we sort of moving forward with sort of the line marking rule proposal here? As sort of shown in the initial bar graph, or the bar graph you can see here in this pie chart is more clearly that over 50% of the gear on entangled whales is unidentified. So when you think about sort of trying to solve the problem, trying to keep whales from getting entangled, when over half of the gear is unidentified, we don't know what's happening for half of the problem. So we're wanting to reduce that proportion. We want to be able to identify gear on entangled whales so that we can better understand what's happening. There's still a lot of unknowns on what increases risk, what can be done. So the more information we can gather, the better. So both being able to like determine that a fishery was the fishery involved or responsible for gear on an entanglement, and also when we can say for sure that wasn't the fishery, and then we need to sort of identify where this gear is coming from. And this is sort of really key for our effective monitoring of gear involved in future entanglements, which is really essential for us getting an incidental take permit. It's really going to be critical for the take reduction team that'll be forming. And I think something, as you can see here on this graph as well, that Dungeness crab makes up a large percentage of the gear that we're able to identify, or 58% of identified entanglement gear. So that's why sort of a lot of these management actions West Coast wide have really been focusing on Dungeness crab. And as far as sort of how we monitor, it's important to note that Dungeness crab gear is set and left unattended. Pots are set and then later checked. So there are no fishery observers on board when vessels are fishing, and that method also wouldn't really be appropriate for monitoring entanglements because whales interact with the gear when it's unattended. And so this line marking and gear marking comprehensively will be our tool for monitoring. The goals of our comprehensive line marking are really for line marking to be easily visible from reported entanglement photos and videos. Entanglement response is challenging, and we often are unable to dispatch an entanglement response team. And so something that can be where we can identify gear of an entanglement from photos and videos is really key. And this has been sort of coordinated along the West Coast fisheries following guidance that NIMS provided. So we've been coordinating with California and Oregon and Dungeness crab fisheries, as well as federal stable pot fishery managers. Let's see. Again, really to reduce the unknown gear and entanglements and satisfy these federal monitoring requirements that we have. Oregon has already adopted similar line marking requirements in rule, and California's rule requirements for line marking are under public review right now. So we're all working collectively to implement these at the same time. Okay, the next section is sort of to get into the nitty-gritty of the rule changes. Are there any questions or comments on large whale entanglement record that folks have before we move on to the next section?
It looks like we have a hand up from Larry. Sorry, Lorna, jumped on top of you. Larry, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. And there's a lot of information that you've provided with the rulemaking, the CR 102s. I think there's 3 of them. And I appreciate much of the data that you've included. But relative to the question that Megan asked, what happened in 2024 to cause us to have what we documented as 4 humpback entanglements, which is historically a pretty high number for the state of Washington. The state of Washington generally, compared to coast-wide entanglements, has generally a much smaller incidence of entanglements. And if you noticed in that graph, during the heat wave in 2015-16 that caused California to have so many entanglements, in part by the late season opening around the Domoic acid event, we had none documented anyway. And I think our first entanglement was reported from 2008. So historically, our entanglements have been at a lower level, let's say, than the entanglement incidents in California. And so in part, you get back to the question, okay, why did we have so many more this year relative to years previous? And I think that speaks to, in a large measure, to how robust the humpback whale population is off of the coast, and how the rate of growth and recovery for ESA listed stocks and continuing for the success of the delisted stocks, the Hawaiian. And when you have so many more whales on the ground, you're likely to have more entanglements, even though the risk from those entanglements may not overall affect growth and recovery of those species. So I just wanted to speak briefly to that at this juncture. I'll have more to ask and say as we move forward.
Thanks, Larry.
And that was our only hand for right now, Megan. You can go ahead.
Great, thanks. So I'm gonna give a review of the proposed changes, and then we'll dive into the details specifically for the coastal fishery. So the proposed rule changes that will impact both Puget Sound and coastal Dungeness crab commercial fisheries. First is that gear marking prohibition that we mentioned. So fishery participants will be prohibited from using line markings or buoy brands associated with other fisheries. This ensures clear distinction across jurisdiction, and it enhances the ability to trace entangled gear back to its fishery source. As I mentioned, Oregon has adopted fishery marking, fishery line marking requirements. California is in the process. Federal sablefish is working on it. The rule specifies, limits this to sort of U.S. The rule that we have proposed limits it to U.S. West Coast fisheries that operate in either state waters in Washington, Oregon, or California, or in the EEZ off the West Coast. So line marking is used on the East Coast for a very similar purpose, the same purpose. And so we wanted to be clear that what line marking we are prohibiting is others that we would see on the West Coast, not sort of the plethora of line marking combinations that are on the East Coast. And we're sort of creating some resources available to sort of share what these are. And the manufacturers who are making the specific line that sort of meets this requirement sort of are, I think, communicating as well that sort of what fishery they're specific to. Second, we are sort of doing a shift in who is responsible for being compliant with these rules collectively. And this rule transfers compliance responsibility from the license holder to the designated operators of vessels designated on a license. So that might be the license holder. Sometimes the license holder runs the boat and is the designated operator on that license. However, there's I think increasing times when the license holder is not who is operating the vessel and designated to operate the vessel. And this is sort of a practicality for like who's running the gear is responsible for making sure the gear is in compliance with regulations. So this is like a sort of a help for enforcement as well. And then we sort of have clarified for our annual buoy registration requirement. This has been around for a while. We have an online tool to register your buoy brands annually, and the rule previously didn't really specify when that registration had to be completed annually, and so we've clarified that we want that completed before the start of fishing season to ensure consistency and to make sure we know what gear is out in the water, which is the purpose of the requirement. So just that clarification there. And then the proposed rule changes that are only impacting the coastal commercial Dungeness crab fishery are the fishing line marking requirements. So vessel operators must ensure that their fishing line is marked with distinct red and black color scheme. Compliance can be achieved using either dual colored manufactured line or manually applied solid sets of marks. The marking requirements are phased in. And we currently have a sunset provision for the solid marking option of 2035 with the intent for the agency to revisit that before then. There were a lot of questions around sort of the frequency of solid marks, what we would need to be, sort of what would be resilient and useful. And so upon a lot of deliberations, we sort of started with this requirement, and we will evaluate it and reassess within that time frame. We are also proposing a surface gear limitation that sort of would limit the length of surface gear, sort of including the number of buoys and the length of the trailer line, which is capped at 36 feet, and limiting the number of trailer buoys to 2. These measures would sort of reduce the risk of entanglement by minimizing excess surface gear in the water. And these regulations sort of mimic what California has for deep water and what Oregon has for all of their waters. So that's where sort of those limits were came from, and so those were developed with sort of deliberations from scientists and conservationists and fishers. So that's how those regulations were put in place for both of those states. And then the third piece is that we have a tribal buoy brand prohibition. So for the Washington coastal Dungeness crab fishery, we are sort of prohibiting vessel operators from registering or fishing with a buoy brand that is used in a treaty tribal fishery. The coastal treaty tribal fishery also has documented interactions with whales. And so to really just sort of solidify sort of our distinct marking across fisheries and understanding what fishery sort of responsible or what gear a fishery belongs to for any entanglements. We want to sort of just make sure that we aren't having any overlap in gear identification. And then sort of just to sort of preview the timeline, phase one for the coastal proposals is when we would sort of implement surface gear or trailer line marking. And in this process, we will sort of maintain the current 12-inch continuous red mark that is required, that's in the top fathom of the main vertical line until folks transition to the more comprehensive line marking requirements of phase two. And then we will no longer require the 12-inch continuous red mark that is required near 1 fathom from the pot. So we were getting rid of that mark. And this is when we would sort of implement surface gear limitations as well. And that was sort of at sort of the advice of industry, sort of if we are asking you guys to change your gear and there are going to be limitations and other stipulations on that, to do it all at the same time so that you guys don't have to go back and redo it twice. Which I completely agree with. And then phase two, which is when the line markings will extend and are required on your sort of main vertical line, which is the line that attaches your pot to your buoy. And that you have to have the top 15 fathoms of line marks to the top, I guess the 15 fathoms from the buoy down, top 15 fathoms of that line. There are some shallow depth provisions for less than 15 fathoms of line when you're fishing and with less than 15 fathoms of line can be marked when you're fishing with less than 20 fathoms of line. So if anyone has any questions on the regulations that would impact both coastal and Puget Sound fisheries, so this slide here, I would love to hear them. But I will be going into detail for all of the coastal commercial regulation requirements that we're proposing next, and sort of would like folks to sort of raise their hand as is appropriate on each slide for that section, so that we can sort of talk about each piece as I'm explaining it and answer questions as we go, because it is complicated. So any questions on sort of these more regulatory or administrative changes for Puget Sound and Coast?
It looks like we have a hand up from Jennifer. Jennifer,
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yes, I have a question on the tribal buoy prohibition.
Yeah.
Is that current tribal buoy brands? Like if my buoy's already been registered for the last however long you've been registering buoys, and all of a sudden a tribal fisherman comes along and uses my buoy brand, I have to change, or how do you know what tribal buoy brand you can't use?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jennifer. I definitely want to make sure that this is something folks can follow. So each tribe, at least East Coastal tribe, to my understanding, brands their buoys with their tribal number and then a subsequent number. And I don't know how each tribe does that. I think that's up to each tribe, but I think it's, they have their own system. And so it would be like a multi-digit number starting with 2 digits that sort of represent the tribe, followed by a dash. And so, if your buoy brand is currently registered, I can tell you that you do not have that. So, we've done a check. I think there's maybe one fisher who's registered a brand that maybe is being fished sort of in both fisheries, which is something we want to make sure that gear is marked distinctly depending on what fishery you're fishing in. So that is really the key. And we will provide some helpful resources to make sure that folks don't accidentally choose a buoy brand that wouldn't be in compliance. You know, the new fishery onboarding information includes sort of reaching out to Jamie or whoever else is sort of maybe in that position to register your buoy brand and to ensure that it isn't already being used. And so in that conversation, you would sort of ensure that you are not picking a buoy brand that is not in compliance with what we'd like. So that would sort of be the pathway that we would ensure no new fisher would register a brand that would not be in compliance with that. And current fishers sort of haven't been registering something that would be required by a tribal fishery.
Okay, so we would not have to change our brand if somebody else, a tribal fisher, came along using that color.
No, it's not really about color. It's about the
Is
brand
it the number on the
It's the
brand?
number.
Not, not the,
Sorry, yes. It's the brand number.
oh, okay. Okay.
Yep. So it shouldn't be an issue. And that's how we're sort of hoping to prevent that from being a concern in the future as well.
Okay.
Hope that provides some clarification. Okay. Any other questions on this before we get into the details?
Yes, we have one more hand from Larry. Larry, go
Okay.
ahead.
Yeah, I have two comments to make relative to this more general commenting opportunity. And I know that we will get into more specific discussions such as surface gear limitations and such. So this is in part an answer to the query about the tribal markings. Each tribe, as you said, they have their own distinct two-digit number that is ahead of any number on a buoy that designates what tribe they are fishing for or within their tribal rules and rights. And that for the Quinaults, it is specifically the number 18. So you have 18 and then you have a dash and then you have a series of numbers after that. We don't do that. So, you know, unless somebody were to mark their buoys with an 18 and a dash, which wouldn't be allowed to be registered by the state, there shouldn't be any crossovers between those buoy brands. One thing that was said that I find a little concerning and actually a little disturbing is what seems to be a default recognition by the state that tribal fishers that have tribal rights can also participate in the state fishery if they have a state license. And I have spoken to this before, and I'm not going to get into it much now, but you made the comment that there was, I believe you said one, maybe there was more, fishers that had tribal and state buoy brands. The opportunity to have great benefit from the tribal obligations, a fisher that benefits from that should not be, and I do not believe state law allows them to also benefit from the state fishery. And that's just came up as you were speaking. I just want to draw attention to that. And I know this is not the place to resolve it, but I brought it up before and it needs to be paid attention to if in fact that practice is going on.
Yeah, sorry for adding that in. That might complicate things. But specifically what we really want is we do not want there to be a buoy brand that is used in a tribal fishery also being used in the state fishery. And that is the purpose of this sort of planned prohibition. We want to make sure that gear is uniquely identifiable. I'm interested in it from an entanglement standpoint, but I think enforcement on both sides will probably be thrilled that, you know, we're not having confusion over what fishery a gear is being fished under, because they're under different fishing regulations and different rules. So we want to make sure that there isn't confusion for gear on the water.
Okay, and that was the last hand for right now.
Great. Okay. So the next section here, I'm going to really get into the coastal line marking and gear requirements that we are proposing. And these, if you've looked through the rule proposal, the language, it's a bit complicated. It's a complicated rule. I did my best to try to simplify it and as best as we could, but would welcome folks to raise their hands sort of on any slide that we're talking about where there are questions or comments, so that we can sort of, because there's so much detail in this, I'd really like to sort of be able to address it as we go. So Leah, if you could just, or Sue, if someone could flag for me on a slide before we transition, if there are questions, that would be great. And so to sort of follow up on that, sort of, we really do understand that these proposed requirements are complicated and that there are many different terms folks use to describe various components of their gear. And so we have created a compliance guide for this rule for the line marking component and incorporated it into the rule so that it's useful for vessel operators and enforcement. So that there's like a resource that both people can look at and be like, yes, this says this works. No, this says this doesn't work. And because, again, you know, these terms, there's lots of different definitions for it. So specifically thinking about here, we have this diagram here that I've created, you know, from like lines. So it's not super representative gear, but it gives a good idea. In the compliance guide, we have a table of definitions that also support this figure here, sort of saying when we say main line or main vertical line, you know, what we're referring to is the line that connects the pot to that first main buoy. The main buoy is that first buoy sort of in a setup. And your surface line or your trailer line, as I think a lot of folks refer to it, or sometimes people refer to it as your ganion line, is sort of what connects that to any subsequent additional trailer buoys. And then I think key here, that sort of we'll get into the rule details, but it's sort of defining this buoy ganion line, which is the line that sort of is looped through the buoy and then attached to the line. And we've sort of made these lines exempt from the line marking requirements in surface gear. So that line can be any color. And we have, this is a piece of gear where we have, in my opinion, a really great photo that shows what it is in the compliance guide as well. And so, you know, includes photo examples and diagrams and, you know, the implementation timeline for the rule. This compliance guide is available online right now, the draft version, for review. And so I really encourage and welcome any feedback. It's something that we can continue to update as appropriate, but would love input on parts that are useful or maybe confusing. We'd really like this to be a very helpful resource. Into the specifics, line marking is red and black for the Washington coastal Dungeness crab fishery. This is part of the scheme coastwide where black is sort of representing Dungeness crab and red is representing Washington coast. Oregon is yellow and black, and California is purple and black. You can meet the line marking requirements using manufactured line that is 3 strands red and 1 strand black. We've written the rule to allow tracer line to be permissible. Tracer line is used for a variety of purposes and is allowed in the line. And then as an alternative to manufactured line, we sort of are providing the option to do solid markings and a set each sort of to meet the line marking requirements, you have to have multiple sets of solid marks, but each solid mark consists of a 2-foot black mark followed by a 2-foot red mark. These marks must cover the entire circumference of the line and can be no more than 6 inches apart, and the 2 colors can touch. The reason for this is that we really need both the red and the black color scheme to be visible to be able to identify it as a set of solid marks. And so we want them close together so that the likelihood of a photo or video or even gear that it can be retrieved from an entanglement, that we can sort of see that mark on the line. And, you know, with sort of our initial implementation of line marking with a 12-inch red line marking requirement in 2 places, I know some folks in the coastal fishery went ahead with purchasing red line. And so to accommodate the red line that already exists in sort of people's gear piles, we have developed a solid marking option for red line. And this is very similar. You have to have 2 feet black marks. So both marks have to be black in this case. And the big difference is that we need a larger space in between those two black marks. So we need 1 to 2 feet is the requirement in between those marks instead of sort of really close together, for the same reason, because we need to be able to see sort of that candy cane of red and black. We need to see the difference in colors. And so we need that space. Okay, so I'm gonna go just to the next slide if there are comments, just to show photo examples. And then I'll sort of take comments on sort of the how we mark line. So here shows 4 examples of manufactured line that are currently being produced and available for purchase. These are not the only manufactured lines available, but they sort of show a variety of sort of examples that work. On the top, we have floating line. The floating line on the left is sort of 2 strands red, 1 strand black, and there is a small tracer in that black line. The photo to the right of that is sort of a red line, 2 strands, and then a strand of black with a red tracer through that, which also is sort of allowed. And then on the bottom here, you can see 2 different versions of neutrally buoyant line that is produced by HydroPro. And that white core is sort of a tracer line that is showing through in various amounts, depending on the diameter of the line, and is also allowed. And then thanks to Jamie, we have these wonderful photo examples of what sets of solid marks look like. The one sort of on the left of those is sort of a 2 feet red touching 2 feet of black on sort of a line. The one in the middle there is sort of showing that 6-inch space between the 2 colors that is allowed. And then on the right, you can see that that is a red line that has then been painted with 2 black marks. And there's a larger red space in the middle to sort of be able to see that color difference. So any questions on marking methods? I'm not hearing anything, so I will move on.
Actually, we just got a hand up from Larry.
Okay.
We're saying that. So Larry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just passing on a message from some who have been, experimenting with marks since marks have been required. The comment, and I'm sure you've heard it, I'm just restating is, there might be a better way to mark those lines than paint. I think you have mentioned tape, and that was the use of a black strand, woven into that line over that 2-foot length that wraps around the line, which should, it seems to me, qualify for, being all the way around the line the mark must be. But anyway, so I just wanted to make that comment. And then Megan, are we still going to go back to the specific gear surface requirements, including the language about the buoy brands? Because I had something additionally to say about the branding. So
no, we don't revisit buoy brands, but if we can come back to that at the end of sort of talking about these regulations, there'll be space for it.
Yeah, okay. I think at this juncture that was all I wanted to say about the actual marking, and that was just a question about whether or not some other alternative could still be introduced as an alternative in this process.
The rule language is drafted, requires the solid mark to be cover the entire circumference of the line, which would indicate sort of paint or tape that would cover the entire circumference. A line that would be intertwined through would not meet the rule as it's written. That's not to say that like this is the public process, this is the public comment, this is when we're taking input. This rule hasn't been adopted, so there is space for things to change. None of this is a requirement as of now, but the rule language as it's drafted would not allow for that.
Right, and I recognize that, and I'm wondering how much flexibility there will be potentially for some public input that might change the course of some of the requirements, and meaning specifically this one. And it has to do with durability also. Black strand woven into a red line is likely to have a longer lifetime than paint or tape. But anyway, I just wanted to pass on some of those concerns that have been expressed to me.
Thanks, Larry. Well, I see Lorna taking some notes, so we'll definitely discuss it amongst our group.
And it looks like we have another hand up from Vito. Vito, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question. When the original proposal for the line markings came out, it was 1 foot section of solid red or red color. And I was under the assumption that when this all came about, it was 1 foot of red with a space and then another red color. And the reason for the spacing of 1 foot was if you had multiple permits, you could use the same rope for multiple states by adding, say, red and then Oregon's color,
Yellow,
and then the solid color of the rope, and then repeat that. So you could, you know, not have to buy all the different states' ropes. And then my other question is, you've already changed it once from the surface gear being a strip to now it's solid circumference of the rope, and it used to be the bottom and the top. Is this going to be the final say in the rope coloring, and or are we going to have to buy a new rope in 5 years because we change it again?
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah, thanks for your comments. First, I'll sort of respond to your question about sort of being able to space it apart so you can have multiple colors. So, you know, the intent of this is to have fishery specific line marking. So it is a federal requirement that we are from the, you know, there's lots of different reasons why we want to know what fishery is involved or responsible for an entanglement. From the federal lens of species protection, they need to be able to attribute it to a specific fishery. And so the goal here is really to be able to identify whether or not the gear came from Dungeness crab in Washington, California, Oregon, or not Dungeness crab, right? So we don't want the same line being used across the fisheries in the different states. And we do understand that that like sort of poses an additional burden for folks who have to date been using the same gear and just changing out, you know, buoy tags and moving between states who have multiple permits. And that's sort of an added burden. And, you know, we're not, you know, there's a lot of things we're talking about sort of to try to like seek resources to help mitigate or you know, the costs that the industry is going to feel from this. But we don't have any financial resources at this time. And then in reference to your second comment about the line marking rules changing. You know, we are adaptively managing to entanglements and what we can do to prevent and reduce impacts to endangered whales. And I'm not going to say that nothing will ever change. I feel we have, as states, worked to develop a really comprehensive proposal that we think has some lasting, you know, some durability to the proposal. Part of the reason why we have two colors is to better be able to identify gear. You know, when Washington first adopted the 12-inch red mark, it was the first line marking requirement on the West Coast. And so it was very much experimental and has been evaluated. And NOAA has told us since that that mark is not big enough and one mark is not enough. And so they have, you know, responded and said, you need to do more. And that's what we are doing. So, and we are, which sort of has been mentioned, but we are prioritizing surface gear and sort of that top part of the gear, because what we can tell from entanglements so far is that often surface gear is involved or the top gear is involved. And so we are prioritizing marking those portions versus marking the entirety of the line. Also understanding that folks fish with a lot of line. And so, you know, and removing the bottom requirement, you know, in hopes that, you know, folks can move their gear from state to state with just sort of taking off a top shot and the surface line, you know, reattaching buoys, right? Given that your buoy ganyons aren't required to be marked, you can, you know, move your buoys to a different surface line. So hopefully gear can sort of still be moved around, but just not all of the gear with sort of this adoption. And we really do hope that this has some durability, and we've been working with NOAA to get their feedback and to do what we can and have, you know, developed a proposal across the states that we think meets the needs of the fishery and the needs of the federal government. So we are doing our best to sort of develop something that won't need to be changed soon.
Okay, and it looks like we have one more hand from Richard. Richard, go ahead. Richard, you can now unmute. Looks like your hand's raised. Okay, he might have stepped away, so we will come back to him at the next break.
Thanks, Leah. Okay, so as mentioned, this is sort of a phased in approach. So phase one is sort of surface gear marking, which would be effective starting for the 2025-2026 fishery season. So December 1st, 2025, or, you know, when the fishery opens. And in this requirement, sort of all of the line that is connecting your main buoy to your trailer buoys has to be marked. On the left here, you can see a two buoy setup that shows sort of manufactured line, you know, our image for manufactured line as meeting that requirement, and the buoy ganyons are exempt, and then maintaining that top 12-inch requirement that folks already have in their gear. And then the middle photo here shows what that would look like for using sets of solid marks. And so it is required to have one set of marks between any two buoys that are attached by a trailer line. So if you were to think about that first example where there are two buoys at the end, there would only need to be one mark there because the buoys are just attached through the buoy ganyons. Whereas that photo example or that diagram example in the middle, there are separate two, you know, trailer lines or ganyon lines that are in between each trailer buoy. And so those lines would have to be marked, each with a set of marks. And then if you are not using any surface gear beyond your main buoy and you are just attaching that to your main line, at that point you only have to maintain that 12-inch mark. And I'll note that, you know, so our initial proposals have sort of had expanded what marking would be required if you didn't have any surface gear. And we worked with industry to sort of just maintain the current requirement until you sort of, until the vertical mainline marking requirements are implemented in the next phase. Any questions about marking your surface gear?
We have a hand up from Larry. Larry, go ahead.
Yeah, you might have said this, Megan, and I apologize if you did, but in the center picture, the two trailer buoy setup, many, you know, that have a ganyon rigged buoy for the main buoy, and then following that, they have a trailer that directly attaches to the end of the first buoy, and then another trailer that directly attaches to the end of the second buoy. So are you then requiring that two marks be used in that case, or one mark? So it'd be the ganyon buoy and a mark, and then the trailers attached directly to the ganyon buoy and not to the line. The surface line is the connection between the two buoys. I'm a little confused on that. And maybe you explained it. I apologize if you did.
Well, I don't know if I explained it. I'm not sure that I'm, you know, with all the different terms, I'm not sure that I'm following your question. But the buoy ganglion line exemption is sort of for the line that goes through the buoy and can be 3 feet in length from the start to the end. And so if that buoy is attached to anything just with its ganglion line, then there's no marking requirement on that, as long as it does not exceed that length. And so it's any line greater than that that is used to connect buoys.
Yeah, okay, so we would redraw the first picture. I mean, we'd include this drawing for people that have ganglion.
Yeah.
And ganglion is a line connecting to another line, not to another buoy. And then there'd be another picture that would show the ganglion buoy, the main buoy, attached with a ganglion style connection, and then 2 buoys past the first buoy that are just connected to the tail end of the main buoy and then to the second buoy's tail end. So you'd only have one painted mark on that surface gear, and then that would be okay. That's all I'm trying to get to.
Yes. So the diagram on the left that shows sort of the manufactured line, in that example, there would only need to be one set of solid marks for that length of line.
Yeah, okay, fine. I think you probably already had it, but I was confused.
Okay, it is confusing, Larry. I get confused sometimes.
Okay, thank you, Larry. And we have a hand up from Richard. Richard, go ahead. Richard, you can unmute.
I don't know if you can hear me or not.
We can hear you now.
Oh, okay. I'd like to comment on one thing because I've had so much experience fishing on the coast. And one of them was one thing that Larry brought up. You know, I started fishing with my dad back in the late 60s, early 70s. You know, if we seen a whale, you know, we ran down and got our little Kodak camera and tried to get a picture of it. And I can say that conservation and you know, no more hunting of the whale. The whale population has dramatically increased, so it's all work. And like Larry said, you know, no matter what we do in the future, we're going to get more entanglements because there's just so many more whales out there than there used to be, and that's just a fact. And then also, I'm looking at these buoy setups that you got here on the screen, and I have a 90-foot boat, and we're 7-8 feet out of the water to our power block. And our buoy setups are, I had the crew measure them today, 2 buoy setups that are out fishing now. And we're fishing 47 feet, and we're fishing 47 feet because we're so high out of the water. And if we have to shorten our buoy setups to 36 feet, it is going to be extremely dangerous for my crew. And they're already complained about it last year in Oregon when we went 36 feet down there. Well, guys started out at 36 feet, but then after a week of the season, everybody went back to their normal buoy setup for fishing deep water. And I don't think there should be a regulation on a buoy setup on fishing that deep water with a large boat to jeopardize the crew and put them in danger. Because what happens is you pull up on your last trailer buoy and there's no slack to get it up to the power block. You got to lift the pot off the bottom of the ocean to get the buoy in the block. And for that reason, that will not work for us. You know, I'd have to get a smaller boat where we're only, you know, 4 feet off the water. But we're not. We're a large boat. We're the largest boat on the coast, and we're much higher out of the water. And to do this to my crew would jeopardize their safety by a long shot. Plus, it'd be straining their backs and their guts out to try to even get the buoy in the block. They have to stop the boat on the pot, so it's straight up, straight down to get the buoy even in the block. We've tried it, and it does not work for us. And so I don't believe 36 feet should be implemented for that reason alone. I mean, when you're fishing shallower water and you're in smaller boats, that works just fine. I had small boats when I started and it worked fine. We didn't have 47 feet. But we do need that on the larger boats out there. And it's just the way it is. If we could fish shorter lines, we would. We wouldn't have to buy any more line, but it doesn't work for us. And I just wanted to bring that up that, you know, if it's mandatory that we got to go to 36 feet, we can't do it. We just can't fish with that big boat with a 36-foot overall diver buoy to trailer buoy. It just isn't going to work. Not for us anyways. It'll work for 90% of the fleet probably, but not for us. And I just wanted to bring that up. And you know,
Yeah.
I think this conversation is all about entanglements, I believe. And it's the first time I've been on a Zoom call with you people. And if we're worried about vertical lines and we want to get the vertical lines out of the water, maybe we should all sit down as an industry and the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife and do what they did in Puget Sound and stack permits and get rid of 20% of the gear. And there'd be 20% less gear in the water. Also, I'll give you an example and has nothing to do with crab, but it has something to do with common sense. In Bristol Bay, Alaska, in the salmon industry, they let them stack those permits up there, where you had 150 fathom shackle of gear. If you bought another permit, you got to put 50 fathoms on your other 150. So you had a 200 fathom permit. They retired 100 fathoms out of the water, and over 500-600 permits were transferred up there. And at the end of the day, the fishermen were happier. Everybody was happier. It worked for everybody. And I believe that stacking pots we're at the appetite now where we really should consider stacking pots to protect these whales. And it would make a healthier fishery for everybody because the natives, you know, as you know, they get 50% of the crab. We've got 223 permits. And I'm not sure how many they fish at once, but to support the 223 permits versus the natives fishing in front of us for 40 to 49 days, whatever it is, it would help. It would help the native fisheries, it would help the whale entanglements, and it would help the guys that can stay in. So if you want to get rid of vertical lines in the water, I think we should all sit down as the industry and the department and discuss maybe stacking pots like they've done in other areas, including Puget Sound. And everybody's happy with what happened up there. And you can't make everybody happy. There's always somebody that's going to say no. But, you know, I think the state needs to step up and say, you know, maybe this is something we should look at. And I think a lot of the fishermen have the appetite for that now, because I'll give you an instance just this season. I think there was 92 or 95 boats that fished 13 miles of the South Washington or south end of the Washington coast. Well, to time that by, you know, there's a few boats in Willapa Bay, but, you know, say there was 75 boats fishing in the water, times that by 400. And you're coming up with there's probably 30,000 pots on 13 miles of coastline. 30,000 pots. That's 300, 100 pot streams from the beach clear to 100 fathom. It's saturation. I don't think you could swim through it, let alone a whale swim through it. And so I think that we should consider that.
Yeah, thank you, Richard, for your comments. I have two sort of I have one follow-up point and then a follow-up question regarding your sort of suggestion for, you know, Fish and Wildlife and industry to get together and have these conversations. We definitely have started trying to have some of these conversations about what else we can do to reduce entanglement risk with the advisory board. And there is a federal take reduction team process that will be starting this summer. And we all fisheries involved in this process will have to sort of be making cuts to try to reduce our impacts to allowable levels. And there will be a lot of things on the table. And so we will be coming back to the advisors and industry regularly to be discussing what topics are at the table and getting feedback. So I really hope that you continue to be involved in these conversations. It sounds like you have a lot of really great ideas, and we'd love to hear what you have to say during this really extensive process where we're going to start in on. And then regarding your sort of comment about sort of the surface line limitations you proposed, I'm hearing you say that 36 feet isn't enough and that you use 47 feet, which is, 11 feet more. Could you give me sort of like what depth that additional length is required? Considering maybe if we're going to sort of try to make an exception, we need to be doing it by an environmental factor. So what depth, what depth are you fishing where you need that additional surface gear?
Well, it's deeper water, Megan, and I would say anything outside, 40 fathoms. I mean, 40 fathoms, most of the time you can get away with probably 36 with our boat, but you get out any deeper that you're out in the currents. A lot of times, you're only getting them gear with just the 2 trailers up, or the gear goes down a lot out there. And you need that extra little bit of line so you can reef it up the side of the boat and get it in the power block. And I can't change the boat's the boat, but we can't, we're not down our power block is not 4 feet off the water. It's 7, 8 feet. And if we're light on fuel and only 1 tank down, we could be higher than that. And so the crew needs that extra little bit of line so they don't have to pull the pot off the ocean floor to try to get it into the power block. It's just, it's just the way it is. And it needs to be considered in your new implications of this, because we can't work with that. We just can't. It's too dangerous for the crew. We're going to hurt somebody. You got 2 guys pulling on the pot, trying to get it in the power block because you don't have no slack. It just doesn't work. We've tried it and it doesn't work. And when Oregon, we went down to Oregon last year when they implemented it. And like I said, I think everybody obliged by it, the first pick. By the second and third pick, everybody went back to normal. And of course, they don't gonna tell anybody that, but they did. And it's because it's just too dangerous for your crew. And I don't want to see somebody get hurt or injured because of implication like 36 feet that does not work for a large vessel that's high out of the water. And that's just common sense. And you can't argue common sense. I mean, we'd fish out there with 1 buoy if we could, but you can't. So,
yeah, thanks, Richard. Really appreciate your feedback and your comments. It's the first time we've heard this comment, so definitely noted. We're gonna move on to the next component now. So the phase 2 of this is sort of marking your sort of main vertical line. And this would be effective for the 2028-2029 fishing season. And we sort of have a shallow depth provision. So if you're fishing 20 or more fathoms of line, the top 15 fathoms has to be marked. But when you're fishing less than 20 fathoms of line, only the top 50% has to be marked. And this proposal started with a 5 fathom exemption of the pot and sort of transitioned to this after hearing from industry that sort of their bottom shots are rigged in a way where they need additional floating line with Washington conditions. And so this is sort of what the main vertical line marking requirement is. And then sort of just building on that, sort of, as you mentioned, we have this option for solid marking that is currently set to sunset in 2035, which is a plan to revisit it before and evaluate its effectiveness. And this is where we sort of get into the details. I don't have all 3 sort of potential configurations as discussed with Larry earlier, only just these sort of 2 examples here. But as you can see, sort of like any line that is connecting 2 buoys needs to be marked, unless, so you're not connecting your buoys with additional line, then that's exempt. And then on your main line, you have to have 3 sets of marks. It's defined as 1 set in the top fathom, 1 set in the bottom fathom, and 1 set in the middle of sort of that line segment that's required to be marked. And again, solid marks must cover the entire circumference of the line. Sort of like an example would be paint. Any questions on sort of the marking intervals or that sort of marking on the main line?
It looks like Richard's hand is back up. Richard, go ahead.
Okay, I think you can hear me now, right?
Yep.
I like to ask Megan a question. You know, like I said, I've been fishing for 50 years out there. Okay, I will give you a scenario. Okay, we're gonna have line markings on our 20 fathom shot. I'm just giving this first scenario. And then we're gonna have to have 15 fathom recommendation for the top shot. Okay, we move a lot of gear, shallow to deep. We don't fish so much shallow, it's mostly all deep, but say you're fishing a 20 fathom shot of line in the teens on the beach, and you want to go out to say 40 fathoms. So then are you going to be required to put a 15 fathom shot on top of that? And then what I'm trying to get at is you're going to be required, the way it sounds to me like you're going to have like, I don't know, 50% of your 20 fathom line with color, and then you're going to have 15 fathom on your top shot. If you move your pots off your beach and out to 40 fathom, you're going to have 25 fathoms of colored line. Is that correct? Is that the way I understand it?
So we actually have a slide on this that I'll be getting to in a second. So hopefully that'll help answer it. And if you have a follow-up question, then we can revisit it if that's okay with you.
Okay, well, what I'm getting at is a lot of the small boats, you know, they borrow money from the plants just to get started for the season. And if they're gonna have to end up putting 25 fathoms of new rope on their gear, and I checked the prices online, is what it's gonna cost 500 pop per met. And the cheapest line is your 3H, which nobody uses on the beach. That's $226 for a 1,200 foot coil. Most people use 1/2 inch on the beach, including myself, and they're $334 a coil. And then your 7/16, and a lot of the small boats will use 7/16 and not 1/2 inch. That's $277 a coil. So if these little guys got to buy all this line and then throw away mountains of line, it's going to be a very expensive. It's going to be very expensive for, you know, a small boat operator. And I don't know if we can figure out how to do it cheaper, but the cost, you know, if you do permitted, you know, it's going to be 40 to 45, maybe the highest $50,000 to re-rig your gear. Plus all the time that you pay your crew, you know, I pay my crew $100 a day for rigging gear, and I got 4 guys rigging. You know, you're looking a lot of expense, especially for the whole fleet. For the whole fleet, there's going to be a lot of expense, and I don't know if the state or what are considering the implications of what it's going to cost the fleet to change for all this. I know it's not going to get stopped. I mean, we're going to go to colored lines, I'm sure, but it's going to be very expensive. And the line has doubled in the last 3-4 years, doubled. And it's not going to be cheap for anybody with a 500 pop per med to go out and re-rig the gear. So I just wanted to bring that up too. There's going to be a lot of cost involved.
Yeah, Richard, thank you. We do have some information on costs. But I think if we could let Megan kind of step through the next slides, I do think it'll help clarify. And again, we can circle back. And I do see that Larry's hand is up. And I'm just trying to not cut you off, but recognize just where we're at in the meeting and want to make sure we get through all of the information. And then if, we can stay later, I don't want to stay on after 7. I do want to give us a chance to get through the whole presentation and address any other questions. So thank you. Do appreciate your input very much. But maybe we could bring up Larry, Leah, and we'll come back to you, Richard. So thank you.
And just one follow-up, Richard, my contact information will be available at the end of this presentation, and would be happy to sort of have a follow-up conversation with you as well.
Yes. I'm sorry, I guess you can hear me now. I didn't
Yeah, we
realize.
can hear you, Larry.
Yeah, sorry to hold up for a second. So I just wanted to go back briefly in part to, and I know you're going to talk more about this, about the problems that Dick has with his large vessel in deeper water, and that's the 36-foot limitation. I just wanted to refer to page 10 of this CR 102 come from January 21st. And it says comments by fisheries participants during the series of meetings to seek input on rural development indicated most surface gear in use was less than 36 feet. And we know that to be true. Only one interviewee indicated they used surface gear longer than 36 feet. Well, I'm not sure who the pool of interviewers were, but obviously it didn't include Richard. And then you have in here, it says error, reference source not found, error, reference source not found. I'm a little confused by what that statement means. And then part of what Richard is getting to is the small business impact statement may be inaccurate in part because of this issue about lengthening line. And we'll get into it a little further, I suppose, but it's partially because the bottom shot for shallow fishing is usually a heavy line, heavier. It's either 7/16 or half. And so when you move out, you're not going to have that as a top shot. So you don't get to, benefit from that potential 15 fathom larger line when you add and have a requirement for the 15 fathom top shot. And that's where you get to the potential 25 fathoms of line needed, or maybe even as much as 30 if you have a larger diameter line. In shallow, that might be as much as 20 fathoms long and would be of the manufactured line potentially. But anyway, I just wanted to refer to that comment on the interviewers, and it's pretty obvious that Richard was not a part of that process. For what reason? I think we have plenty of reasons, but we're hearing him now.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. We will get into that in some of the further slides. I think in sort of consideration of time of all the staff who are working this call, I'll try to make it through the rest of the slides as quickly as possible, and then we'll sort of have questions at the end. Okay. Nope, that's okay, great. So, we've talked about this one. We've sort of just had a conversation about it, but this is sort of the surface gear maximum allowance that is proposed. No more than 2 trailer buoys in addition to your main buoy, and then also sort of allowed sort of end marker buoys that are less than 5 inches in diameter and cannot exceed 3 feet beyond the last trailer buoy, and then that trailer line length of 36 feet. So that is sort of what that is, and we heard sort of comments on sort of concerns around that. And then this sort of gets at some of the questions that were had about sort of what folks need to do, how much line they need to mark. So just want to clarify that you don't have to have a 15 fathom shot of line continuous that is marked in the same way. You can have shorter shots of line that you've connected to reach that, if that sort of is how your fishing operation runs. You can use different approaches for sort of your surface gear or your vertical gear. So this example here on the left sort of has, if you're sort of fishing, 15 fathom bottom shot, you can sort of have the top, 7 fathoms marked for that half. And then you can have a 7 fathom top shot, sort of combined, or maybe it's 7 and 8, but you can combine methods and shots of line to sort of meet that minimum requirement. These two slides I'm just going to go through really quickly so that they're in the presentation, but this is just sort of a comprehensive example of what the entire rule proposal looks like at the end with manufactured line, and then again with solid marks. So those visuals. The next piece is sort of the economic impact. So we did a small business economic impact analysis to understand the cost of compliance. And regulations will impact approximately 223 small businesses. Each vessel license is considered a small business. Cost estimates are calculated based on what is required to be in compliance. But the actual cost for each business to convert their business practices may vary. So this is to say that we did realistic estimates for the rules in place. So we estimated that every vessel would be using 36 feet of surface gear for all of their setups. And we buffered that by a fathom to account for additional line needed for splicing. We considered that each vessel would have to have a minimum of a 15 fathom top shot, and again, buffered that additionally to have space for splicing line. So we do consider these to be realistic estimates of the minimum line needed to purchase to realistically fish. That doesn't mean that it would match everyone's fishing practice as they sort of move from shallow to deep water. To the cost per license to switch for manufactured line ranges from $4,500 to just under $20,000 with our estimates. And then the cost for manually marking line, this is for materials. Liquid paint is sort of, just under $900 to just under $1,400. And spray paint was coming in at $600 to $1,000. And we did ask some questions about labor costs. Although there's like a lot of variability in this, estimates range from $4,000 to $15,000 per vessel for replacing the line, and about $6,000 for painting existing lines. And those labor costs are not included in the cost of compliance. That is just sort of for materials. That is in the above bullets. And then here's sort of our breakdown so that you can see what this looked like for us. So we use sort of a floating line per coil cost estimate of about $119 to $230 per coiled line. Neutrally buoyant line is a bit more expensive, $227 to $334. These were cost estimates for manufactured line. And then for a can of spray paint, we looked at $10, and liquid paint was $55 per gallon. And then this here shows sort of what the estimates are for each a 300 and a 500 pot permit to prepare their trailer line, their main line, and collectively all of their gear to be in compliant with line marking requirements for the different methods. And then that final little table there is sort of an average cost per pot, just as sort of a easy comparison, and it's an average of those ranges. And so there's a lot of variability in that, but it gives sort of an idea of sort of anticipated costs. And you can see that, painting is significantly less than purchasing new line as a low cost alternative, but it doesn't really account for sort of the frequency in which that would need to be reapplied. So in this, there are a number of cost mitigation strategies that we implemented in our rule to try to mitigate this cost. We do recognize that it is not a small cost to switch over to manufactured line or to mark all of your line. So the first thing we did is sort of this phased implementation. So staggering compliance deadlines over multiple years reduces the financial strain and allows vessel operators to spread costs over time. We've, providing flexible compliance options. Hold on.
We can't hear you anymore.
Okay, can folks hear me now?
Yeah, we have you now.
Great, my headphones died. And then So, sorry, flexible compliance options. So, providing the option to produce or purchase manufactured dual colored line versus marking. Marking is obviously like a more affordable approach with existing gear. And then we made a number of adjustments based on industry feedback to our rule that also sort of reduced the cost. So, initial proposals we started with was requiring 20 fathoms of the vertical line to be marked. Reducing to 15 fathoms resulted in cost savings of, almost 3,000 for a 300 pot vessel, and I'm closer to like almost 5,000 with the 500 pot vessel. And similarly, we initially started with wanting to require 5 sets of marks on the vertical line, and we reduced that to 3. The next slide here, sort of just as a summary of some of the changes we've made based on feedback. And I'm going to just leave this here in the presentation for folks to be able to see and brush over it, given that we're short on time. And then I think most importantly are sort of our next steps. So there's a timeline here that shows that, we started implementing entanglement risk reduction measures in 2019. Line marking started in 2020. And then here we're in 2025 proposing this new line marking rule, and then those requirements would go into place in 2025 and 2028. The rule is going to commission at their March 20 to 22nd meeting so about a month. And as a hybrid meeting, you are welcome to attend virtually or in person. This will be in the Tri-Cities or Kennewick. You can register to provide public comment verbally on the commission website. I don't believe that registration is open yet. It'll open closer to the meeting. Or you can contact the commission's office at their phone number to register. And then you can provide written public comment or verbal public comment either by engaging on the public webpage, providing an email to the email listed here, or calling the voicemail with that project code. As well, you guys are welcome to contact me with questions, comments, and feedback. But this is sort of the formal commission review process in ways you can provide feedback. Okay, the next slide is just sort of this, I can't talk about whale entanglements without reminding folks what to do. It's really helpful if you report it immediately and stand by if you can. You can call in to the reporting hotline number or the Coast Guard on channel 16. Take photos if you can. They're really helpful in identifying gear and the species of whale and folks to respond. And do not attempt to disentangle a whale. It's very dangerous for both parties involved, and we would just like you to report it. Sorry for speeding through those last couple of slides. I wanted to make sure that before our meeting ended at 7, we had some time for folks to provide any additional comments or questions. On this slide is my contact information and Lorna's. You are welcome to reach out to me via email or by phone to talk more about this if we don't have time to address any of your concerns in the next 10 minutes.
Okay, it looks like our first hand is from Jennifer. Jennifer, go ahead.
Yes, I was wondering when you priced out the line for the cost comparison. I just read something recently that the line has gone up 25% in the last month. And then also, has there been any movement towards any kind of grants for these small businesses? Because obviously it does exceed a minor cost. This is not a minor cost, and I do fear that your cost is under I think it's going to cost us a lot more than what is being shown. But anyway, any movement on that, getting any kind of grant, considering the goal is to help with whale entanglement, I would think there would be some money out there.
Yeah, thanks for your question. First, we got the small business economic analysis was done at the end of 2024. There's a detailed timeline on how we have to get things done per rules. So that's been completed. It was completed by the end of the year. I think so. The line costs were provided by England Marine in I think October, but I can follow up. But at the end of the fall winter of last year. So not that outdated. Although it would not account for any sort of recent increases in cost. And then as for sort of looking for grants, we are looking for opportunities, as well as Oregon is looking for opportunities to sort of find resources to mitigate some of these costs. I haven't seen any. This is sort of a unique situation, and there haven't been any opportunities I've seen that we've been able to apply for, but we are looking, and we encourage anyone to keep their eyes open, and the crabber associations, if they see anything, to share it with us. And we are planning on sort of doing what we can to apply for funds that are available.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer. Our next hand and last hand is from Larry. Larry, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So I had a question about the buoy branding earlier and I held it.
Yes.
So if you look on page 2 and 3 of the rules themselves, and you look under section 5, subsection DI, as per a discussion we had with Megan and Lorna, a couple of us on the last town hall, Greg McMillan and I were attending. We were concerned about having a limit on the number of buoy brands you could have on your buoy. Now that's been rectified in just saying that the buoy brand number registered under 5DI must be registered. It doesn't say that you can only have a single buoy brand on the buoy. The reason it came up is because I used to fish Alaska, Oregon, and California, and I had the same buoy brand number for Oregon and Alaska, and then a different buoy brand for Washington. And I was allowed to have those registered, those numbers registered in all 3 states. And like I said, the number for Alaska and Oregon was the same because I applied for that, but Washington wouldn't accept that number I wanted it to go to. And so I had a separate number for Washington. And so we discussed that, and that was recognized as something that could be incorporated without really singling it out, just by saying you must register a buoy brand. And that was good and appreciated. But I'm looking at 5D III. It says vessel operator. It says it is unlawful for a coastal Dungeness crab fishery vessel operator to fish for crab using any other buoy brand. And I just want to make sure that those 2 sentences or statements aren't in contradiction of each other. The idea was to allow, potentially more than 1 brand on a buoy, but only 1 brand registered with the state. And I just wondered if III is in contradiction to I. That was my question. And then just one thing, I just wanted to re-recognize that, it's likely that many fishers will end up having more than 15 fathoms of marked line, however it's marked, because of the way they, change their gear as they go deeper. And so relative to the small business estimate of cost, for many fishers, it would be considerably more because of that behavior. And we're speaking because the bottom shot in many cases is a larger diameter line, and the top shot in deeper water is many times a smaller diameter line. And thank you for the meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. Thank you for your input, and thanks for joining us tonight. That was our last hand for the evening.
Okay, thanks. And Leah, I can really quickly respond to Larry. Larry, there isn't a conflict. I'm looking at the rule and seeing what you're pointing to. And all we're saying is that you can have one of those buoy brand numbers registered. And as long as that number's on all of the buoys that you're fishing, doesn't matter if there's other numbers, so they shouldn't be in conflict. It's just that number needs to be consistent across the gear.
I was hoping that's the way it would be read. I just wanted to confirm it. So thank you, Lorna.
Yeah, you're welcome. And thank you.
Okay, and that was our last, oh, and we have a hand, last minute hand from Richard. Richard, go ahead.
Hello?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. I just want to bring back something that Larry just was kind of hitting on. You know, we want to get rid of more surface line or vertical line. Is it possible, you know, like a 15 fathom shot is an odd fathom, 15 fathom shots are odd. There's a lot of guys that uses 5 and 10s, but very few use 15 that I'm aware of. And it's possible, you know, to get less line in the water. About just 10 fathom shots on the top. We cut the cost down a little bit and we'd have less line. Because if you have a 20 fathom shot on the beach and it's half colored or whatever, and you put a 10 fathom on it, you know, you can go out to, you know, 24, 25 fathom and lay them back out. But a lot of times don't want to go out there. That's where the crab are at. So you're going to be obligated to put a 15 fathom shot on. You're going to have more surface line for no need. And so I just wondering, you know, like maybe we could look at just a 10 fathom on the surface buoy shot. I think it would make more sense to the fishermen.
Thanks, Richard. I went over the slide pretty quickly. But if, for example, if someone is, I'm just going to try to find it. If someone is fishing on the beach with a 20 fathom bottom shot and the top half of that is marked, they can then add a smaller than 15-foot additional top shot that is marked and meet the requirement, as long as then collectively between the two shots of line, the top 15 fathoms is marked. So you don't have to switch to using 15 fathom top shots if that's not your practice. You just need to make sure that the top 15 fathoms of line is marked collectively. And we did consider, you know, less than 15 fathoms of marked line, and that had been a conversation. And it is not sort of meeting the objectives and needs of our marking requirement. So we are not going to be reducing the requirement below 15. And again, I think I mentioned this briefly, but we did start at 20 and have since reduced to 15. So in sort of consideration of effort and costs and all of those factors.
Yeah, well, from a fisherman's standpoint, I think 10 makes more sense, but it was just a suggestion if it could be changed to 10. I know a fisherman would be much happier than going with 15. So just a suggestion.
Thanks, Richard.
So when are Megan, when is your next meeting that we could actually sit down with Department of Fish and Wildlife and have some more industry people there to, you know, get their input also? But I think we just all want to make it as much common sense as possible and not go over one way or another.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. We've definitely had a number of industry meetings. We had a public industry meeting in September, if my memory serves me right, and we had pretty low participation. You know, we held that sort of with this rule as written in hopes to get some more feedback before we brought it to the commission. And before the fishery started, didn't really have a lot of participation. So understand that, you know, folks want to be engaged. We've really done our best to provide multiple opportunities. We've held some small workshops to really understand gear setup and the needs. You know, we had the interviews with with you know, a subset of industry participants for the small business economic impact analysis. So I don't know that we will be hosting another sort of like in-person meeting before we make it to the commission. I think that this is sort of our public meeting. Like I said, I'm happy to take a call from you and discuss this further, or an email, or however you'd like to chat. And then, you know, there will be the commission opportunity for other folks to provide public comment. And I do encourage you to, communicate with other crabbers who maybe haven't been involved to speak up and share their opinions, either through the written public comment, through reaching out to me, or providing public testimony during the commission meeting. We'd really like to hear other thoughts and opinions. So
Olympia a lot, Megan?
what was that?
Olympia a lot.
Sorry, I still didn't quite hear you. I don't know if my speaker's working right. I'm gonna turn.
Olympia.
Olympia? Oh no, the first meeting where we have the public hearing is not in Olympia. It's in the Tri-Cities, but you can participate virtually. Sorry, I'm just gonna pull it back up so you can see all the details. So you can call in to provide comment if you don't want to head out there. And then the rule adoption meeting, which will be the following month, will be in Olympia. But I don't think there's an opportunity for public comment there. But Laura can correct me if I'm wrong.
What I was asking, are you stationed in Olympia?
Oh, I work from Olympia on occasion, but I work from the Port Townsend office primarily.
Oh, where is your office? Is it in Kennewick or Olympia?
It's in Port Townsend. Well, I work from home primarily, and then I work from the Port Townsend office in Olympia, and then sometimes the Montesano office. I work lots of places.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much. It's been an interesting conversation.
Thanks, Richard.
Yeah, I think Megan, and thank you, Richard. Some good comments. Yeah, sorry we missed some of that kind of input in some of the previous meetings we'd had to the level of detail that you'd provided. I would just flag for the upcoming commission meeting. We will be presenting to the Fish and Wildlife Commission Fish Committee on the first day of the commission meeting. And then on the subsequent day, we'll present to the whole fish commissions. So there will be, I believe, two opportunities. One is a listening opportunity, and then at the full commission meeting, there's an opportunity for public comment. But just wanted to clarify that there is this kind of two-step piece to it. And I'll just refer you to the webpage and to look for the agenda there, because I don't want to speak to, if I've only seen a draft, I don't know if they've put out a full final agenda at this point. So just, check that page as it gets closer to the meeting. And then, as Megan has said, if you have comments, ideas, any thoughts, please do provide them through the commission's portal or through Megan. We can also help be a conduit to get those inputs into the formal record. So just want to thank all of you for your attendance tonight. It's been very helpful. And I know it's a good chunk of your evening. So again, thank you. And
yeah, thanks, Laura. Yeah, just reiterate thanking everyone for taking the time to engage and be here. We really appreciate all of the feedback.